Okay.
For our next session, I would like to introduce the moderator for our panel in Sickness and in Health, exploring the diversity of gender in patient-centered HIV care. Jadon Wright Morgan uses the pronoun she, her, hers, and is the Deputy Director of the Pacific AIDS Education and Training Center. Jadon is committed to improving the lives of BIPOC, transgender, and non-binary persons, and is a leader devoted to the practice, transformation, and capacity building for medical providers and clinics.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And welcome everyone to this session, next plenary session, our first plenary session of the conference. Very happy to introduce you all to folks who are going to be sharing some of their experiences in healthcare with us and how their gender has been centered or not during that healthcare experience in HIV. So I see my panelists coming on the screen. Thank you all for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to give you all a brief overview of the learning objectives for this session. We're going to be exploring the diversity of gender identity. We have a diverse group of folks joining us. We're also going to discuss the importance of gender identity in the provision of HIV prevention, care, and treatment services. We're going to describe how to repair trust and affirm gender diverse folks in HIV care. And also we're going to identify some tools or resources to foster continued learning. So I am extremely happy to introduce my panelists all together, and then they will each introduce themselves. So we have Marcus Arena. You want to give us a wave, Marcus? Thank you so much. Tari Williams. Hey, Tari. Vic Motherwell. Hey, Vic. Levi Maxwell. Welcome, Levi. And Octavia Lewis. Hey there. So I'm going to start it off, and the panelists are going to give us a brief introduction, which will include their where they're at, their role, their gender identity, their current work, and anything they want to say about HIV care. So I'm going to kick it off with Marcus. Do you want to start us off?
Got to find the right button here. Hi there. Would you repeat the questions, please? Because my mind went blank the minute you called on me.
No worries. That's why I'm here. So we just want you to basically to introduce yourself, and your introduction can include where you're coming from. We want to know where you're at, your role, your gender identity, your current work, and any relationship you have to HIV, people living with HIV and AIDS.
I am right now living on coastal Miwok territory, which is Sonoma County, California. My role here is to actually talk about what a patient's point of view and the experiences that I've had. I am retired now. I'm a former discrimination investigator for the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. And I've been doing gender identity education since the mid-1990s, and specifically working on training healthcare providers, professionals, including HIV providers and professionals since the early 2000s, working with Joanne Keatley through UCSF. So I'm just living proof that one day you will hopefully see retirement. My relationship with people living with HIV and AIDS is that I'm from a generation where it's hard to find people my age. I'm 64 years old. And when I was in my 20s or my 30s, it was the #1 cause of death of my birth cohort. So I've lost many people. I've cared for many people. I've had the joy of watching people survive, and to see HIV go from a horrible death sentence to a survivable illness. So I'm just really honored to be here with these fine panelists.
Thank you so much. We're honored to have you here, Marcus, and to hear more about your experience as a patient. We'll get to that in just a minute. Now I'm going to invite Tari Williams to introduce themselves.
Good morning, good afternoon, good wherever you at. My name is Tyree Williams. I reside in the DC area. While working in the DC area, I reside in Virginia. Pronouns are he, him, king. Um, my work in HIV includes trans masculine and trans men, especially of color, making sure that they're included. I got involved by accident. Just want to make sure that our voices were heard and making sure we ended the epidemic.
Thank you, Terry. Our next panelist is Vic Motherwell. Would you introduce yourself as well?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation to be part of this. I'm so honored to be here. I am Vic Motherwell. I'm from Chicago, but I have been blessed to get to work with people from different groups, including the folks from the Center of Excellence in UCSF, which is so amazing. I currently, sorry, my thing was saying something about the video. I currently work for an organization called the Care Plan. And we do specifically medical care navigation with LGBTQ older adults, and generally folks who are dealing with marginalization at large. But my background has been really for the last 20-ish years, really specializing in trans health and also as it intersects with HIV care. So I've gotten to work on a number of really incredible projects, including the SPINS project that was referenced before, as well as other great projects. I also am a person who's been a gestational parent in a serodiscordant couple. And so, navigating the world of giving birth and all of that has been a really specific and interesting experience that I'm excited to get to be present in this round. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. And last but certainly not least, Miss Octavia Lewis.
Good morning or good evening or good afternoon, depending on where people are. My name is Octavia Lewis, pronouns are she and her. I am a African-American woman of transgender experience living with HIV. I am the transgender health coordinator at Montefiore Health Systems here in New York. And I work with individuals of trans experience with getting them connected to care and trying to assist them with staying in care. And one of the things that bring me the most, joy in this world is my boys, which are my background. I try to, again, bring them to social events to keep them current and to also hope that one day they'll take up the mantle and be able to go further than I ever was able to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, this panel is awesome. I feel like I'm privileged to be in y'all's presence and get to talk to you all about healthcare and how you've been able to navigate the system. So let me start it off with what has been your experience in searching for an affirming provider? What are 3 things that you want to make sure that a provider knows about working with you? And maybe how do you communicate that? How do you let providers know what they need to know to work with you in particular? Don't all jump at once.
Okay, I'll go first. You go next. Okay, we good. I mean, I see you. Okay. So for me, personally, I'm a trans man. So the first thing is making sure that I'm assigned female at birth. Coming out the gate, navigating that space, understanding that, and making sure that you understand like my original assigned gender at birth and understanding what that looks like. Because if you don't understand that, then we can't go further. Because there's so many things that involve that, and making sure it's not just about me being on my hormones or my levels. It's also about, it's about ovaries, about cervical cancer, stuff like that. What does that look like in navigating? And then I would say another thing is also being aware of not assuming, you might know my gender, but you're just assuming my sexual orientation. Don't just assume that it's feminine identified. And if you do assume, and then most time they assume feminine, they assume maybe cisgender women, and that might not always be the case. So understanding what that looks like, it's okay to ask these questions, and it's also a way to ask it and understanding that. And I would say the last thing is understanding where you're located, because your geographical location means a big thing. If I'm in a rural area and it took me like 2 hours to get here on bus and via whatever way it took me to get here, please understand that my anxiety and my stress is probably very high. And what does that look like coming in? And then we're talking about HIV care. Those are just 3 things right there before we can get down to just getting my the care that I need. So that's what I would say. It's very important and affirming.
Thank you, Tyree. Those all seem like really important things that actually providers can do a lot of before they even see you in care. So I want to offer that to providers to think about that. I saw Octavia interested in answering this question. Also, Victor, Marcus.
I'm sure I'll take a stab at it. For me, one of the things that I definitely like to bring up, and Dr. Moulton brought it up in her speech, is that we are not a monolith. And when you see us, or when we come, to our appointment, depending on where we are in our lives, you might not even be engaging with us. You might be engaging with our trauma. So I definitely want a healthcare provider who is able to move beyond the visualization of what they expect trans people to be, because some of us are at different stages in our transition. Some of us do not want to have surgery. Some of us do not require to take hormones, but we are still who we are. And for me, it is important to find a provider that moves beyond the aspect of telling me what I need, and instead of asking me, how can I be of assistance to you? Because the things that you may think are important, which for me as a person living with HIV, you might think that, oh, taking your one-a-day regimen, that's what's going to keep you alive. No, making sure that my boys are safe and stable, making sure that we have dependable housing, making sure that they have food to eat, right? That would be my number one priority. So again, I need a provider who is interested in getting to know me and the things that, keep me able to show up and be in my best self. So again, those are things in which I definitely look for in providers, and to also let them know that, again, it is not about what you think about us. It is what we know inherently about ourselves. And for me, I just, again, going from being that on the other side of the desk as the patient to now being that person that also assists with providing care. Don't take ownership of someone else's care. Don't put your expectations on us, because what you expect of me may not be what you get. And that is not any fault of my own. That is yours because you expected those things. I did not come here and I did not sign up for those. I came here because I was in a point of need. So those are things in which I definitely, look for, and the discussions that I have with my healthcare provider.
Thank you so much. You made so many great points. One, I just want to call out, especially for providers, is really, you talked about partnering with your provider and really being able to have that conversation. It's a back and forth. It's not, you're going to tell me what is, I need to tell you who I am, because I have been in my body for my entire life. And we just met you today. So we want to make sure that you understand and can be open to the conversation and to the experience of really partnering together to make sure that health is realized. And I also heard you talking about your boys as your main motivation. And I think that's so important for providers to understand who and what is motivating folks to show up for care and to care for their health. Those are great points. Thank you. Victor, and Marcus, I see you as well, but Victor, why don't we have you go next?
Thank you so much. I'm loving what everybody's saying so much. And Octavia, there's 2 things I would love to bounce off of what you said. Number one, I feel you on the kids, obviously. Oh my God, nothing deeper, nothing more powerful than our babies, and that's that, period. And I think, one part that I would want providers to know is that even for those of us who don't work in this field, which, obviously most or all of us do here, trans people and non-binary people have had to, in order to survive, become experts in our own care, because so often we go to a provider and they literally don't even know what we're talking about. Right. So not only are we having to educate them, we're having to like break open the very seal on the thing. Right. And it's so I would want providers to be coming into that room with the kind of humility of almost equals, right? Of like, yes, I know you may have gone to all this schooling and all this whatever, and that's wonderful, and I absolutely respect that. But also coming into this room, there's a good chance that even beyond my own care, as every individual patient of any gender has expertise of their own body, many trans and non-gender conforming people have a level of expertise about trans health that would be really useful to come in with a great deal of respect for, and to really also kind of gratitude for, because there's a lot of providers who are getting name and fame for doing trans care, who are learning off the backs of trans patients. Right. And those trans patients are not only not getting recognition or remuneration, but they're also not getting the treatment and the respect that they really deserve, or I should say that we really deserve. So that's one piece. The other piece is, Octavia, you mentioned trauma. And I think one of the things that is absolutely critical is that any and every provider should be getting extensive trauma-informed care training, period. I don't think to my mind, no provider should be working with anybody without trauma-informed care training. But particularly if you're going to be working with our communities, to say it in the most, simplest way, so many of us are not just survivors, we are multiple time survivors. I'm a 7-time survivor. So if you come at me talking about you're going to move fast with a pelvic exam, no, you're not. No, you're not. I will discontinue your care like that. And you will never see me again, except to like essentially offer your organization resources around training. Right. And it's things like that where it's like providers are coming in again with that sort of notion of I'm the expert here, so I'm going to tell you what it is for you, just not in your best interest or ours. Right. Because that's it just doesn't go well. It doesn't go well for anybody involved. And at this point, things are changing enough to where, you may have some repercussions if you continue doing those things with our communities, because it's starting to matter within the medical community. Right. And so just an awareness that if you don't think this matters, and obviously, most of y'all do, because you wouldn't be in here if you didn't, but, passing along that word that, it's certainly worth taking an account of yourself to say, even if this doesn't matter to me on a personal level, this matters to me professionally a great deal. If you want to be able to stay relevant as a provider, this is where it's at. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Victor. We want to hear all of your 3, 4, 5, 8 cents, all of them, because you definitely had some things to share with us. And I think that's such an important point, that it's really, there are communities out there, and I am not transgender, I'm a cisgender person, but I am a co-conspirator with trans people in my life. And I think that is an important place to sit. We can't, any of us, do anything on our own. We need community. And so having our providers be part of our community and being able to lift up our voices is important, right? That's why we do this whole conference, is like, we want to bring people in and help them understand how to approach in the appropriate way. Thank you. Marcus, did you want to add something?
So much has been said. I feel like we have some really common themes that keep coming through. And the first thing I had written down was, you should understand my history of trauma, of medical trauma. Like, you should just assume when I walk in there that that's been going on for a long, long time. And I expect you to know the basics of trans care. Like, I don't want to give you a TG 101, like Victor said. I'm not up for that. I did that for a living. I'm not here to do it for you. You're supposed to be my doctor. I want folks to own their own ignorance. So I had to find a new primary care physician after 20 years. And so I'm looking around. I'm new to the area. And the first question that I get asked by this one woman is, have you had the surgery after I came out as trans? And that to me is a big red flag of, you don't know anything about trans healthcare if you are asking me about the surgery. So the next person I went to see said, okay, that's good clinical information to know. I need to ask you some further questions. What procedures have you had, if any, medically, that I need to know about? And that was a much better way of approaching me on that question, because that allowed me to self-select. And I've also learned, because I've been through chemo and radiation and hip replacement and neck surgery and back surgery, I've had a lot of medical stuff go on. I don't list all my surgeries anymore, because the person who's doing my knee surgery does not need to know whether or not I've had a hysterectomy. It's just not important. And I find that it's a big flag for people to go off on me for being trans when they don't even need to know. So, don't make assumptions. And one of the best examples of this is when I saw a GI doctor who was going to give me a colonoscopy, and I knew they had to have a need to know about whether or not I had had a hysterectomy, and I marked yes. And they were looking at my form, and they put it down in front of me, and they turned it around, and they pointed to the question. They said, "Did you mean to mark that?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Oh, okay, thank you." Very matter of fact, was not, because it was a clinical need to know. And it was no big deal. Like, okay, now I know what's going on. And I've been seeing this gentleman ever since, because he did it right by me. So, just don't make any assumptions, and ask questions in a respectful way.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And such specific examples. And I'm sure you guys all have many. I also want to bring in one of our voices who I haven't heard from yet, Levi, who we haven't heard from yet. Levi, did you want to introduce yourself? And then also, if you could provide us with maybe a couple of things that you really want to make sure that providers know about providing care for you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Levi Maxwell. I'm based in San Francisco, California, which is coastal Miwok territory. Currently, I am in Atalan territory in Jalisco. My main focus right now is gender and racial equity within nightlife, with a focus on trans and trans of color populations. And that extends from everything from diversity and inclusion of talent, flying out DJs, to what kind of materials we have of local organizations in an accessible manner in a nightlife space where young people are at. I also have about 5 years experience working and advocating with homeless LGBT youth, formerly as a homeless LGBT young person who was doing advocacy work. Octavia was an amazing mentor of mine in New York City. And I kind of teared up when I saw her. I think there's two main things actually that I was shocked about. One, because it hit close to home. Trans attracted men not knowing resources where to get HIV services and care. A sibling of mine not knowing, he was like, I had to save $400 to get an HIV test. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's in San Francisco. He's a fisherman in San Francisco. He introduced me to other men and people in Oakland and San Francisco, introduced me to their partners who were like, yeah, I had to pay for an HIV test. They didn't know that they're cis men who are in relationships with trans women. They're like, I'm straight, therefore I cannot go to LGBT spaces, not realizing that there's not a barrier or a wall, providing resources and materials for folks who are not necessarily the most kind of aware of queer health services in San Francisco and Oakland. And I think also just a really big thing of like providing HIV testing and supports and cares in a nightlife rave setting. Young people don't necessarily feel welcomed at, say, a big LGBT center in a major city, right? People might not know about clinics, such as the Dimensions Clinic, which is a specific trans and non-binary clinic for people 18 to 24 or 16 to 24 in San Francisco. So it's about accessibility. In the same way that you talk about Narcan inside of a club and not, 3 o'clock in the afternoon in an office somewhere. Where are people having sex? Where are people meeting partners? And also, where can people seek out this information privately in a dark corner instead of like going in the daylight to talk to a receptionist and see people who don't look and reflect them. And yeah, sorry, I feel like I ranted.
No, not at all. I mean, you had so many specific resources. So all the people in the Bay Area are now really informed of not only the Mentions Clinic, where we need to be doing outreach. It's great. I hear a little feedback. Is that me? Oh, I don't hear it anymore. So great. So thank you for that. I'm gonna keep us moving along and ask this next question to you all and really think about, when was a time that you had to advocate for yourself with a medical provider? And what was the health outcome in that scenario? We're curious about that. And we're curious because we want to make sure that we're providing some examples for our providers to be able to know when they may have gone down a wrong path and people just disappeared. But we're here to let them know that's why people disappear. It's because you went down a wrong path. So was there a wrong path that a provider has ever gone down with you? And what was the health outcome associated with that?
Sure, I'll start with this example. I'm not gonna say it was the wrong path. I think this was actually one of the ways in which my provider got it right. I was residing in Atlanta, Georgia. I had just finished my undergrad, and my caseworker, who is still now my mentor, and my doctor at the time, who I love to death, Dr. Nancy Hewing, she taught me about informed healthcare decisions. So when I was having a conversation with my caseworker, Mr. Avery Wyatt, who is my mentor, I was telling him, like, I want to live in my authentic truth. Like, I don't want to, just continue to dress up at night. I want to, legally get my name changed. Like, I want to live in my authentic truth. Like, I want to be Octavia. And we explored some options. And one of the things that I did research on was HOPSA at the time, the HIV/AIDS Service and Administration in New York. And I looked it up, I did all the research on it, and I brought it to my physician. And we went over all the paperwork together. She filled out everything for me, and she faxed it over to the service line. And she did this, I'll never forget, she did it on a Wednesday. And you're supposed to wait 48 hours before you call, but I was so anxious, 72 hours. I was so anxious, I called that Friday, and I found that I had got accepted. But for me, I'm, telling that, story of a healthcare provider who got it right. It's because she taught me how to advocate for myself. And she taught me that even though she was my healthcare provider, that ultimately the decisions that I make would impact me. So I needed to have ownership of those decisions. And that is one of the things in which I, tend to ensure that I instill in whomever I'm working with. Because I haven't always had physicians, that saw me, as a person that can make my own informed decisions. I've had some that come at me with like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm here to help you. Like, I'm the expert, so you need to listen to me. But I was like, no, but like, I understand you're giving it from a standpoint of pathologizing me. That you think all these dots have been met in order for me to take, do what you're asking me to do to have a certain outcome, but I'm not there yet. And that was one of the things in which I can say that, one of the healthcare providers got right in an instance for me. But again, I have had those that, again, have discredit, and discarded me because they saw me as a statistic and they weren't able to humanize me because, again, I was just something that they learned in a textbook or something in which, oh, well, we have to provide treatment to these individuals, but like this is not my primary focus. And I've had those before as well. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I give an example of like what was done right.
No, thank you for that. We were going to get to that, but you brought us right around because that is where we're going, is we want to encourage that the things that do go right. All right, I see Levi raising your hand. Go ahead.
Hi. I would say an experience that I had, ironically enough, was being celibate and actively not engaging in sex. But my early experiences working with medical staff was constantly asking me if I want to go on PrEP for PEP. And it was a bit of a challenge because I understand we all know the statistics at this point, especially for Black and brown trans young people and MSMs. But it was a really strange circumstance where I like had to explain to them like, no, like I understand like celibacy is what I'm doing right now. Don't want to engage in it, and people actively not believing me and having to almost like connecting them to other resources and other individuals who are advocating for me and knew like my medical history. I would also say too, a challenge was sometimes just not being able to get PrEP for somebody, maybe who's undocumented or somebody who just did not have the time or capabilities of going to clinics, and just actively having to like bluntly tell like, medical officials, like, I'm absolutely lying to you, I'm giving this to a friend, and finding co-conspirators who were willing to just give out these bottles to the community, because at the end of the day, like, those are not your pills. Those pills are not being funded by your pocket. This is federal, state, and city funding. And if you're really about that shit, you really care about our health, like you will do what's necessary to make sure that our communities are safe. And having that frank conversation with people is something that I think is the best way I've been able to advocate for myself. I was, in contact with trans medical mental health support from the age of 14. I am technically on paper considered like the first generation of like early transitioners at Vacaville, Solano County Kaiser Hospital, and was able, but I also had the experience too of like my father saying, if you're a doctor who was my pediatrician my entire life and a gender therapist, okay, as you transition, you can go on hormones. And I did that. And he was like, oh, I've been waiting. Like my doctor was like, I've been waiting for this day. And my gender therapist, after 3 sessions, diagnosed me with gender dysphoria. Then my dad decided to change his mind. And what did I do? I got a job. I got a disposable debit card and a PO box, and I was importing hormones from Fiji. And I think being able to show doctors that ultimately I will get what I need for myself and advocate for myself, and I will get it for my community. They were able to recognize that like, this is important clearly. And I think the best way of advocating is sometimes having a hard truth that I've been able to have a harm reduction approach. I've been able to do a risk assessment. I've been able to manage my risk. And this is something that I'm teaching to my community. And like when a doctor can trust me not as just a victim, right, a statistic, a potential problem to come, and rather someone who is actively facilitating and creating my own path and journey for myself and community, that is when they've been able to like shut up and just be like, how can I be in a place of service?
Yes. Yes. I mean, just yes, the pathways are there, right? And communities create pathways for themselves. That's what I think is so beautiful about the way you express that, Levi, is like, not only are you advocating for yourself, you are advocating for your community, and you are caring for your community in whatever means you need to do that. And how can healthcare providers support you in that, support other community members in that, so that we all can get the healthcare that we need? Because healthcare across the board is challenging, right? And so you add all these other intersectional identities to it, and that makes it that much more of a challenge. But we also have community there to help us support and move through these spaces. So yes, thank you, Levi, for that. And I see Marcus. Go ahead, Marcus.
I want to just briefly touch on a time when you get it wrong, you can nearly kill somebody. And one thing that comes with some medical transition is a risk of complications. And I had such a complication in 2001 with an infection at an injection site of my testosterone. And because of my lower back disease, this kept being misdiagnosed by a major teaching hospital in San Francisco as inoperable sciatica. And I was treated in the emergency room by the staff, by the head of orthopedics, like I was drug seeking. So they kept dismissing it. And finally, when I came back with a fever of 104.5, they did an ultrasound on my leg that I'd asked for 9 days earlier, and they found a 500 cc infection, which by that point had infiltrated my femur. Now I had sepsis. 4 days in the ICU in an induced coma, 13 days in that same teaching hospital. And the funny thing is people didn't come in and clean my room regularly. And I had to ask for clean sheets when I would sweat through them because I was sweating a lot with a major infection raging through my body. I had MRSA. And people, and yet odd people at all sorts of time of day looking into the door and saying to each other, God, that used to be a girl? You are kidding me. Wow, that is fascinating. And I laid there in that bed and I had to listen to all of this. And at one point, the surgeon, a woman, came in and said, do you have any idea how you got this infection? And I said, very matter-of-factly, yeah, I think I went outside the clean zone when I injected. And her precise words to me were, well, what do you expect when you mess with nature? And the only thing I could say in 2001 at that point was, thank you so much for saving my life and thank you for saving my leg. But it was at that point that I learned really quickly, like, shock therapy, that you can't trust doctors. And doctors will overlook you because they think because you're trans, you're anything other than what you're presenting, which was somebody who kept saying, I have leg pain. So go to the heart of the complaint and ignore your own biases. Listen to what the patient says and get over your own self if you do have a problem with whoever this patient is, whether they're trans, whether they're HIV positive, whether they are a homeless person, whether they're a drunk. There's all sorts of different ways that we get written off. People of color, I'm Native American. And I get a lot of passing privileges because I'm male and I have skin privilege. But I'll tell you that all of that privilege ends at the emergency room door the minute that my penis is too small to pass. So people really got to get in touch with the fact that their biases have life and death effects on every patient they're dealing with. So trust us when we come to you and we say, I'm really sick.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so sorry that happened. And I also am so thankful that you made it through to tell us what has happened and how people can do things differently. Because that's really why we're here today, is to help people understand that, just like you said, these are life and death situations. They can be. And we're not playing here. This is stuff that we need to really pay attention to, and in all aspects of those intersectional identities that we all come with. So thank you so much.
That was 20 years ago, but what I want to stress that in rural places that aren't San Francisco or LA or New York, these things happen all the time.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that, Marcus, but at the same time, I've heard stories of things that happen in cities, in all kinds of different situations where biased people are everywhere. We don't know where they're going to show up in the system, right? And so you can think that you're safe because you're in San Francisco, or because you're in New York and DC, or, because, and you can get this mindset of like, oh, I'm going to be safe here. But it's up to the healthcare system to really make it safe everywhere. And I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're there yet. So I just want to affirm your sharing. Yes, Levi, please chime in.
First of all, I'm so sorry you experienced that, Marcus. That is disgusting, and so invalidating. And like I was, like you said earlier, like it's this is still going on. This is something that clients of mine have had when I worked at the LGBT Center, especially kids who are coming from reservations, Native American reservations, people from very rural places, of, you know, asking, like they had like to get their tonsils out, they had some other medical issue, their trans health comes out, and then someone makes their own snap judgment of trans and how this somehow is conforming to it, right? You have like a form of breast cancer, and it's instantly because it's because you're on hormones, even if they haven't gone on transition yet, right? That they have a diagnosis of gender identity disorder, and then there's other medical professionals who will be making snap judgments. When I was in Brooklyn, I was getting my wisdom teeth removed, and there was a group of medical professionals that were there, that as they're carting me into the room, like they noticed I had breast growth, and they were asking me questions on hormones, very inaccurate conversations about like, oh, eventually get off of them, right? When are you having the surgery? And this is before they were passing me out. They were asking me questions about my gender and my own, like my own gender journey. And I was just kind of like, how is this appropriate? And then also, right before I knocked out, I'm like, are they going to talk about me? What are they talking about? Are they experimenting and touching my body? Are they laughing at my body? Like, how does this kind of like the way that people kind of, even well-intentioned, kind of speak on their curiosity, you realize that you are their textbook picture chapter of like transgender. That is an alienating experience that ultimately makes me not feel human, and rather like an experiment, that like a medical oddity, like Ripley's Believe It or Not, like that in that floating jar, you know, jar of floating liquid. The challenge is, you know, when there's one person in a clinic somewhere or a hospital who is really great with someone who's trans, there's a network that they'll have like 20 other girls come through, pumping through, being like, I want to talk to this person. And it's very quickly to get overwhelmed. And then what you'll have is a hospital like Kaiser or, you know, API, which is Asia Pacific Island Wellness, will refer them to someone else who just might be gay, or might be trans, but that trans person might be a nurse who is true trans and believes that there's only a particular way to be trans. It's understanding that sometimes, like, you hire a trans person, you don't have the cultural awareness to know that that trans person might be racist, might look down on Black trans women, might only support, you know, the Asian or Latina trans women who are in their communities. That this person might not support me because I had to do a double mastectomy, and I am technically MTF, and I did have to do it for my own safety and well-being. Breast cancer runs in my family, and having to have that whole conversation with medical professionals after my mom died of breast cancer and my aunt died of breast cancer, that like this is something that, you know, we're gonna get tested on, but we need to do, and they wanting to be like, well, you know, like if you're MTF, like this is what you need, you know, this is the track that we want you on. While I'm trying to tell them like, no, like I'm non-binary. I know I've been on hormones for a long time, but I've been very clear with them what I am. And it's a challenge sometimes to not only have to advocate for yourself with cis people, but to advocate for yourself with trans staff who feel like they know better. Especially if they're older and their transition is more old school. And I understand that. My father has a cousin who transitioned in the 90s. My grandfather has a cousin who transitioned in the 70s and 80s. Like, some of the conversations I've had with some of them has been rough. But I think what staff need to do is sometimes get stakeholders within the community to hire trans advocates and trans nurses and trans medical staff, because like those are the communities that will be most benefiting or experiencing the most detriment from an inadequate trans staff member.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important to remember, is that trans communities, non-binary communities are not a monolith. So just because you have one trans person who works in a place, or you have one trans friend, you don't know the trans community, right? And so we need to get better at making sure that we're enforced, that our community is backing us. And how do you all get in touch with your community and support from your community when these types of things happen, when there needs to be support? Where do you go to? How do you leverage your community to provide that support? And I'm going to encourage Tyree or Victor to join our conversation.
Yeah, so it was interesting as I was listening to our colleagues speak or whatnot. It touched on a lot of things. It, I have a brother. I have a trans brother right now who we just kind of like dealt with something. He's right now pregnant. He's with child and he's HIV reactive. So going to his appointments for his OBGYN appointments have been very hard. And so like when he first told me, I was like, what's going on? He was like, I just need somebody to go with me that's gonna understand where I'm coming from. Like I just need you to sit there and just see what I'm talking about. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm gonna go with you, of course. So he goes in and of course, the OBGYN, he says, I'm here for my appointment. He's trying to check in. And they're like, okay, where's your wife? He's like, I am the patient. They're still asking these questions. And then, it's like a question mark. So he has to do like the paperwork. And of course, asking about his status or whatnot. So he answers it. So then like they go from like asking questions like, how is this even possible? Like, I'm still trying to understand this. And mind you, this is like the front desk. He's not even like in the private room. He's not even, and I'm just like, what in the world is going on here? I'm like, hold on, stop. Like, I couldn't even just sit there no more. Cause I'm like, he's already uncomfortable because most other people that are in there are feminine identified. So they're looking at him. So now they know like he's a man that's with child. So they're trying to figure this out. And then it's like, you're talking about this whole status of being HIV reactive. And it's just like, wow, this is just a lot. Like, and then I see like phones start, I'm like, whoa, like, so I get up and I'm like, hey, can I speak to the office manager before we go any further with this? I'm like, bro, have a seat. Like, I just told him to have a seat. And I'm like, obviously like, then I take over. And I had to catch myself because I was so upset, but it's also very important to get your point across without letting your emotions take over. But it was so hard, I'm not even gonna lie. And talking with them, I'm like, I've talked to the office manager and having a conversation and all this, there's so many violations, like where are the HIPAA right? Like, how did we even get here? Like, he's not a science experiment. There are so many things that this person violated, and how is this okay? And the office manager excuse was they're short staff. So they haven't been fully trained. So then we had so now it's like, okay, so I don't need to talk to you anymore. So I was like, you know what? I know he needs services, but he's not getting service here. And I told him, let's go. And made phone calls or whatnot and advocated, and we found somewhere. But it was hard because he needed the help. And the fact that he had to wait to get that help because you couldn't even respect and understand so many violations that you have done. And it's like, you're not even gonna even check. I don't even want you to check. I don't want you to check a temperature because I don't even trust you. Like, like Levi said, are you gonna laugh at me, or now are you gonna take this seriously? Are you gonna look for certain, like, this is now not just my life, but having a life that I'm carrying. And so now this anxiety, so many things, and you're playing these games, like it was so hard. So making sure that, I'm not gonna stand there. And I think with going back to your question, it's hard, like trans masculine community is very small, and especially trans masculine men of color. And when you talk about trans masculine man, especially a trans man of color that's with child, there's so many stigmas around that. So we're very tight knit. So the thing where, when one is with child, we're all with child. When one is going through it, we're all going through it. We have conversations. We have checkups. There's so many. That's why there's so many organizations that are being formed now for trans men, because we're like seeing so many rights that we don't have data. We don't have, reproductive rights. We talk about Women's Day. It's like a hard conversation because you don't want to take up space, but then we are kind of including that with assigned female at birth because there's certain rights with reproductive. So where I go with that, there's so many things with intersection. It's like, what do I do and what am I advocating for? So it's like, we are very, very tight knit. I will say that the trans men of color, we do not play. When there's a problem, we all got a problem. We are going to advocate for each other. And I appreciate that. That's what I say that we do. We rally around each other. We have conversations. We have groups. We have meetings. We just sometimes hang out with each other just to see what's going on. And so they have a baby shower. You have just graduation. It doesn't always have to be sad neither. Sometimes celebrate someone getting a new business, a new job promotion, like, advancing, like celebrate one another. Start celebrating the good things. It don't always gotta be the bad things. So that's what I would say. I hope, as far as my community and what we do to advocate in situations like that.
Thank you so much for that. That's so important to remember the diversity of experience too. I think your example not only showed how you are supporting each other, but how, it's a community. It's a real community. It's like, it's not just these letters that are all mashed together. It's people who are knowing each other, who experiences the love, the drama, the all that life has to offer. And that's important for providers to know, because I think that's what we don't think of when we see somebody in the middle of the room and we start making HIPAA violations, which are across the board problematic, right? So that's what we're not seeing when people show up, is not seeing that they're connected to other people. There are people behind them, there are people with them. And I know I need to take that on as a provider. It's not just that I'm seeing this individual, this person is connected, and they will come for me if something happens, right? That's important to remember too, is that is a place that is important for us all to live in. We're on stage. When I worked in a clinic, I used to always tell my staff, we are on stage. Everything you say, everything you do, those notes that you write, everything that you put into your job should be open, because this is a process of partnering with our patients. Does anybody else want to talk about their community and what support is out there? Victor, did I see you? Yeah, or Marcus?
I just want to briefly touch upon, in the Native American community, among the LGBT community, we call ourselves Two-Spirit. And we actually have societies and organizations and gatherings that we hold in different places of the country, all over the year. And when I first started going to these Two-Spirit gatherings in 2005, I was the only transmasculine person there. And the last time I was there 2 years ago, there were 20 transmasculine people. So this is because the Two-Spirit community has been embracing of learning about us. Hey, Davey. And so there's always that support, like Tyree's talking about, trans men of color. We all know that we can reach out to each other. We all know that we've got advocates who have got our backs when stuff happens. And particularly, we celebrate together. We dance, we sing songs, we do ceremony. It's a really important time for growth and community. So that's one way that it happens in the Indian community.
Thank you. That's so important. Thank you. It's mind-boggling that people don't know that people are connected to community. But I think it's something that we need to lift up in this space, because that is what it's all about. And Victor got his child. Hey, Victor, you want to introduce us?
All right. Hi, everybody. This guy finally woke up from his nap, and so he's a little bit cranky. This is Theo. Hi, everybody.
Hey, can you say it one more time for me? I couldn't hear you.
Sure. His name's Theo.
Theo. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for introducing us to Theo.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I'm really glad we're talking about celebration and stuff like that, as well as the community piece. I think because of the dehumanization thing, I think, and because of the way of interacting with us, like statistics and like stereotypes, it's, it's almost like this constant framing of like sadness and tragedy. And we do deal with sadness and tragedy. And as communities, we are often in mourning, unfortunately. And, and we also, we also come like many strong. You know, it's almost like people don't expect that you're going to have a family behind you. You're going to have your people who, you know, come tenfold with you. You know, I love Tyree, what you said about like, when you're pregnant, we're all pregnant. You know, and like Chicago trans community is strong. Like I left Chicago for 10 months and went to the West Coast. No shade to the West Coast, but I had to come right back because I was like, you know, Chicago is such a trans city, and it's the strength of our people here is robust, and everything is that underground network. So it's like, you know, somebody was mentioning, like, Levi, I think you were saying about, you know, one provider does okay and then 20 of the girls come through. You know, everything we do is word of mouth. So if providers don't know that, it goes both ways too. So if you're in there messing up with us, everybody knows. Everybody knows your dirt up and down, you know? And so I would want providers to know that and to be able to like hold that in their minds, almost like you know, I think people do status very strangely. And I don't mean HIV status. I mean like cultural status, class status, where it's like, you know, oh, if you were interacting with another doctor or with a lawyer, you might be interacting with them like, well, oh, I want to make sure I mind my P's and Q's because this person's powerful. Man, I wish you'd turn that on us because we are powerful. And I think a lot of times that's not what people are seeing when we walk in the door. People are not seeing somebody well connected, well communicated, well organized, all of those things. And we actually are. And in some ways, I would argue more so than most communities, you know, and it's amazing and it's everything. And when I speak with people who are not from our communities, a lot of times I feel kind of sad because I'm like, wow, you don't have this. You know, I don't mean to like say that in a super negative way, but I feel like trans communities are the biggest blessing. And I just couldn't have it any other way, you know? So I want to celebrate that with you all as people are raising the celebration, because that is the truth.
Thank you so much for that, Victor, because that is exactly what I see here, is that this is a strong community. This is a resilient community. This is a community who has been through some things, like we talked about, the 7 traumas, right? All the things, but who is still thriving, who's still having little babies that are cute as can be, who are just living their lives. And that is important to bring into the medical conversation. Is like, it's the cute things that we have to deal with. There's lifelong things that are there, but outside of this doctor's office, I am a whole person, right? Levi, had your hand raised. You want to get in on this?
Thank you. Yeah, I also want to talk about the fact that there is a difference. Like, there's a difference, and I think a growing difference between online trans communities, in which especially younger people or people who are newly transitioned, their only form of contact is online communities and resources and connections, versus those of us who are able to engage with broader trans community. And that's just 2 completely different ways of conveying information and resources that medical staff need to kind of get aligned with. There's also just a very stark contrast between those whose parents are, let's say, upper middle class or upper class, and who are supportive of their children, versus those who aren't. Like, I'm going to be like 100% honest. Like, you know, the kids who are coming from Marin County, which is a very, very wealthy, powerful neighborhood in the United States, is not going to need to be referred to a clinic in which the majority of the clients there are just trying to get food and housing. That actually might not be best for them to go to those spaces, because those individuals are oftentimes given far too much space of support and care when there are individuals who have more pressing needs and matters. I would also say too that, like, in terms of community, I tell this to staff also, like to people that, like, I know every trans Black person in San Francisco by 1 or 2 degrees of separation. People who have the mayor's office on their phone, people who are running the transgender cultural district, individuals who are working with the district representatives. That, like, if one of your staff are transphobic and their behavior, passive aggressive or actively just verbally being said, does not change, like you will have the entire band hammer of the community. And in a place like San Francisco, that hammer is large. It's very Mario, just like boom, just like, and not to say this is a threat that you need to be afraid of us, but like, while we might be victims of particular circumstances, we are not victims. My marginalization does not make me a marginalized individual in spirit, and that my humanity and our collective humanity will be maintained by us, for us, and that you might push us down or make us question ourselves, but it is our own communities that reinforce who and what we are. This is a restorative process. This is like when I'm in community with my family, even if we're just kikiing, even if we're doing voguing, or we're just like just spending time with one another, reminiscing, that like those are the things that reinforce what I'm doing is the right thing. And staff should be part of that restorative process and not be that extractive and exploitative process. Thank you.
Thank you. Public service announcement by Levi. Thank you so much for that, because that's important, that we need to really think about not only our communities, but how we want providers to treat us. That's what I want to hear from you all now is, what are the stresses when you go into the medic? I see everybody's head like, oh no, it was coming now. The stresses that come in when the anxiety that comes up for you when you have to enter into the medical space. And is there anything that a provider can do to help alleviate that? Tari, I see you shaking your head yes. So I'm gonna call on you.
I was thinking somebody else. Okay. So yeah. I love Planned Parenthood. I love them. I love them to death. Love them. Like, especially Virginia, they're one of the best when it comes down to transgender health. The only thing I don't, and I'm still trying to understand, wrap my head around it, it's when there's the history, of, most time being like a women's clinic. That's like we're on the street, the culture, when we talk about it, like, that's what they're known for, right? But then it's like now they're starting to shift. They're very inclusive. But it's like, it's kind of uncomfortable sometimes if I'm like going in there, because like I'm happy to get like my medicine. I'm going to get my primary care, get my moans, and someone else might not be in the same mood that I'm in. And so I was like really sitting back one day, and I was just like sitting there just observing. I was like, dang, this is kind of hard. Like, because I don't know when someone else is at, and whatever reason why they're here, whatever, my unconscious bias, I don't want to, offend somebody by the way I come in. So I had to like start reshaping my mindset of how I go in, and looking at things. So I question, like, when we talk about the inclusivity, like, we're definitely there with the medical, but what about the culture? What does that look like? And not saying that it was done on purpose, because probably again we're moving forward. That's why I said that. But to look at that, because again, like, you don't know where somebody at, or situations and anxiety and mental, and we're talking about mental health, and what does that look like when we're in these rooms, and you just don't know. And having an atmosphere for everybody to feel comfortable, I think setting, and I think having that atmosphere before you even get to the doctor is very important. Before I get to the provider, what does my atmosphere look like? What are my questions like? What am I vibing with? Again, does the receptionist know any information? If I ask them about prep, they shouldn't ask me what is that.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that's Planned Parenthood, I'm just saying in general. I just want to make sure we got that. But just in general, like, they shouldn't ask me, well, what is prep? Well, you are working in a doctor's office that's supposed to specialize. You don't, okay. Or if and I appreciate them also too, on the flip side, being honest about, asking what it is, but at the same time, it's kind of the expectations of, me coming here, like, and now I got to re-educate you, and I got to do all this, and now it becomes, it's a little frustrating. So yeah, I would say the culture, what does that look like? Because before I get to a provider, before I get there, I'm looking at the culture and how I'm being treated, and how I feel comfortable even coming here. Because that's how I'm going to feel when I walk back to the exam room, and how comfortable I'm going to feel opening up to you and telling you about my needs, or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. And I think what you're talking about is a lot of things that you can pick up without even talking to anybody, right? You can come into a medical space and know whether it is going to be affirming or not, based on what's on the wall, how people are talking to each other, what are the magazines in the room, how's the furniture set up, what, like I pay attention to all those things as well. And I think that that's really true, is like we can do a lot of things to help signal we're affirming space without having to say anything. Octavia, I want to bring you into this conversation about what are some of the ways that you've experienced stress when preparing for a medical visit, especially with your children. How does that all happen?
Sure. Well, I'll give you the approach now from being a health coordinator. Many people may not know, and some may do that. When providers are in medical school, they only get 6 hours of LGBT cultural competency training. So that is only 6 hours throughout their whole medical school career. And within those 6 hours, they might get a 30 to 45-minute lecture on transgender healthcare. And then those same medical students graduate, and then they go do residencies and fellowships. Depending on your fellowship, for instance, if you do fellowship in orthopedics, you might not even get any training on what it is to experience with people of trans experience. And working within a large healthcare system and being one of the only out people of trans experience, it does become overwhelming. Because the thing that, I get pushback on is it takes time, Octavia. But when you're dealing with people that have been ostracized within marginalized communities, who gets to determine how much time it takes? And for me, it sometimes I go home and I say to myself, I just can't continue to go at this route, because it's like you're sitting at the table with individuals that ask you to lead, but don't necessarily see you as a leader. And when you have to sit there and say to them, well, wait, I understand the process you're talking about, but you want us to do it in 10, when in actuality, we can get it done in 3. But if we look at the way that the system is created, it is a business. And if they're looking at it from the standpoint of Octavia, we need to make money. So if I need them to come back in 2 visits so we can get, bill their Medicaid twice or bill their private insurance twice, then that's what we need to do. I hear you saying that it can be done in 1 visit, but we still need to generate this revenue. And unfortunately, that is how many of us are viewed in the healthcare system is, oh, we're finna generate some money off of them. And that's why a lot of them tend to ask, well, what procedures have you had? Because if their medical institution is, doing phalloplasty, vaginoplasty, breast augmentation, chest masculinization, voice feminization, facial feminization surgery, facial masculinization surgery, and you see a trans person coming through your door, they're gonna look at it like, oops, okay, let's get them in, let's get them surgeries done. Let's push them on through here. Like, hey, come on. Now we can, send them over, because they got to have letters now to have surgery. So now we can put them over on a mental health person. We can bill for that. Now we can bill for them going to see the primary care physician over here. That's the bill. Now we can generate income because they got to go and see the surgeon. And then they got to come back and see the surgeon before the surgery to go over what we're going to do. And then they got to come back for aftercare. So they're looking at us like, how much money can we get off of these individuals? And for me, it is hard, because I being on the standpoint of not knowing all of that stuff before I started working for, a large institution, it is disheartening. So for me, when I go to my doctor's appointment, I'm just straight to the point, like, look, this is what I'm here for. This is what I need. No, I don't want to see the nutritionist today. No, I don't need to go see the mental health provider today. I'm just here because I want to get this particular service. No, I don't need to go see the peer navigator today, because that's what we're given. And oftentimes it's like, we didn't come here for all this. We know what we want, and this is what I'm here for. So being able to have witnessed that side and to understand the model in which they use to again keep us coming back, because they don't give us the tools to empower ourselves. They want to keep us enabled on the system. And like those are conversations in which we don't really have with one another. And I'm thankful that again, the last question you asked about having community, I need community, because after days of leaving work and having conversations on like, hey, like we can provide care this way, and like this model may work for some and it may not work for all. Some trans people like all-inclusive trans healthcare, where they can go one place, where they can see the cardiologist, where they can see a therapist, where they can see their primary care physician, where they can see an endocrinologist. Some people are fine with that, but other people may not be, because they saying to themselves, oh, if I go there, everybody automatically know I'm trans, because that's where trans people go. So now I'm outing myself, so I don't want to be here. So ways of telling them that like there are different models that we can use, because as we have stated before several times, we are not a monolith. And that there are going to be several models that work for us, because we are all at different places in our lives, different places in our transition. And trying to have those conversations with people that don't see us beyond the mechanism of the almighty dollar, it does get disheartening. But that is how I tend to be straight shooter with my doctor. Like, look, this is what I'm here for. This is what I need. No, I don't need anything else. No, nothing else is going on. Because as a woman of transgender experience living with HIV, oh, I'm very on top of things like, oh, well, I've seen this study. What is going on with this? And even when we talk about, PrEP and PEP, when we talk about trans individuals, especially those individuals that are post-operative, when we talk about, PrEP, after 27 days of usage, it can be found within the vaginal walls. But how does that translate for a transgender woman? Does that show up in my, my neo vaginal cavity as well? Like, what does that research look like? So it is about making sure that we are included in things, and that, things are done, and we are, at the front of these studies. And like I tell people, don't ask me to include people in a study if you can't come back and tell them how to best, serve their community. Because one of the studies that we did was on asthma prevention, where like we, went into the community and we told, them about, oh, it's your pipes, and like, especially those that are in public housing, like, it's roach droppings that help, fuel the asthma epidemic, and like how to clean it up. But I'm like, if you don't go into these neighborhoods and then translate what you got, then who is this information for? And that is what is often done in our community. They come in, they do these studies, but they don't tell our people like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna help you put that on a resume. You know what you just did, that was called research. What you just did was called negotiations. What you just did, how to make those transferable skills for, our community members. And that is one of the things in which I am definitely, trying to break down with the little earned access I do have within that space. Is to ensure that I'm empowering my people, because I know that I'm not always going to be there, but I am, ensuring that I am, elevating others and bringing them along, because I've never wanted to be the only one in the room. So that is what, I continue to do with my healthcare providers, and continue to do, working within the system as a whole.
Thank you so much for that, Octavia. It's so important to think about it at all the different levels, right? We've been talking a lot about the patient level, but you brought in the administrators, how things are set up to begin with. What is the driving force around healthcare, which is it's a business, right? And that's important for us to remember too, as healthcare providers. Where are our abilities to streamline our services? Where are our abilities to take more than 15 minutes for a visit? How can we make sure that this system is actually patient-centered, as we all strive to be, right? Patient-centered care, our medical home, all of those buzzwords that I know y'all know, but how do we actually make that into practice? How do we actually demonstrate that for the communities that we serve? I think you had a lot of really good points. And I'm going to hand it over to Levi for a last comment before I open it up to some questions. Folks in the chat, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will be having questions in just a moment. So Levi, you want to drop some more knowledge on us?
I want every medical professional who is either here right now or who will be looking at this to really ask themselves, why are you trying to be a better person for our community? Why do you want trans people at your clinics and institutions? Is it for the cash cow? Is it because trans is now in vogue and you can't be a progressive medical space without trans people? I really want people, like I'm not gonna lie, when I did just a hairline lowering for FFS, and I had a surgeon kind of push me to do jawline work. And I said no. I was in the hospital bed before surgery to sign a piece of paper that said it was gonna be hairline surgery and jawline. I said, no, we agreed I didn't want to do it. He's like, oh, well, no, just sign it. I know I just want to give it to you as an option, but we're just gonna move forward. I won't do it. And it was another random nurse who was a bit younger and who was queer, who was like, this isn't right. They're gonna charge Medi-Cal for 2 procedures, only doing one. And I could tell that the doctor was really just trying to have you sign that piece of paper so he could get that extra $20,000. And that was through Kaiser. That was a doctor who was referred through the Gender Pathways program, and I'll say it to his face. And in that moment, I was like, oh, I am a product. It reminded me of when I went to New York City in 2012, and a lot of the failing, dying neighborhood clinics were talking about HIV care and about PrEP. And they were ill-equipped and unable to really support people where they were at. And clients were being exploited and used. I think that there's a lot of people who are really well-intentioned who are going to see this and who are going to be advocates, and they're going to be around a lot of coworkers who on the surface kind of have that same attitude and feeling. But I really want you to if you're really a co-conspirator of change for a trans community, if you see yourself as someone who's an ally and as someone who is in family and in community with trans people, I need you to be able to advocate for us when we're not in the room. I need you to advocate for us when it's just other cis people who are around. I want you to advocate for us, even if it's someone who is higher up, and that you to get your coworkers together and say, this is not right. There is funding that's finally being passed around and given. And for once, trans people are not seen as an economic burden that is only going to get people into the red. But then ask yourself, like, is the material wealth of Medi-Cal more valuable than our worth as human beings? And in what ways can you convey that to those around you? Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's important to remember, that we all have a voice and ability to advocate in the space that we're in. I really think that you provided so much information to this group of providers who will take this and be able to provide better care for your brothers and sisters coming behind you. So I really appreciate you sharing, appreciate your time. And I am also going to close the panel. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Levi, Octavia, Marcus, Victor, Tari, you all are amazing. And I'm just so thankful to be in your presence today. It was awesome. Appreciate you.